Hi, this is Tim Weber from South Texas College, and I will be giving you an introduction to the topic of emotions and motivation. The first portion, I'm going to give you my personal take on that based on my study of that, as well as further investigation and work with people both on a casual basis as well as clinically. So do pay attention, especially to this first portion. Take some notes on it and so forth, because you may need that later on. And so here we go. I'm going to bring up the outline for you. And here it is. And let's see. Good. I have my little laser pointer here, which hopefully will be able to enable you to sort of pick up at what I'm looking at the moment. So here we go. So let's start off with some definitions. Well, maybe. There we go. So motivation has traditionally been defined as a need or desire that energizes behavior and directs it towards a goal. So some need, desire, which suggests that it has something to do with our survival, and energizes behavior. So it gets us to do something. It moves us. Motivation directs that behavior is directed towards attaining some goal. So it has a purpose in that goal. Here's a definition of emotion. It's not the one you'll see in your textbook. This is from the American Psychological Association. I kind of like this one a bit better. They say an emotion is a complex pattern of changes, including physiological arousal, feelings, cognitive processes, behavioral reactions made in response to a situation perceived to be personally significant. So notice, first of all, changes. So changes from kind of baseline physical state, just sort of a baseline um, feeling state and so forth. So something changes, and this would include physiological arousal, so arousal of some processes in the body, whether that be heart rate, blood pressure, so forth, we'll get into later. Also those changes including feelings, so that's sort of a subjective internal things. I don't know how to describe it other than when you have a feeling. And cognitive processes, how we process information, changes as a result of that emotion. We're processing things, interpreting things differently. And then behavioral reactions. So there is some change to the behavior as a result of the emotion as well. Notice in response to a situation perceived to be personally significant. So something significant to us then is the root cause of these changes. Okay, so it's not something that is insignificant. Now, as we start to look at these various motivational and emotional states, one of the things that I first thought of when I first started studying this, I said, it's kind of really hard to draw a line between what might be considered a motivation and emotion. It really seems to be an awful lot of overlap, and maybe they're not really two different things, but they're really just kind of the same thing. And turns out, as time went on, research came out that suggested that, yeah, there's really something to that viewpoint. So the work of Jake Panksepp, his book, Effective Neuroscience, identified neural circuits that were emotional and motivational, pretty difficult to separate. Now, we had to look at those earlier in the course, so I'm not going to look at his list here, spend any time on that, but I'm going to look at an update to Panksepp's work. This came out 2012, and Tornchuk and Ellis then updated this based on additional neuroscience research that had occurred since then, and identified 9 affective systems, again, sort of spanning both motivation and emotions. So we're going to look at those and look at just what functions do each of these have, what do we call them, and then just what do these things motivate? What responses do we see when each of these systems is active? And by the way, note that yes, there is the neuroscience that backs this, that these are actually physiological processes that go on in our nervous system that result in these motivational emotional states. So, first of all, uh, there are the seeking system. The first one on your list is really a matter of basic functioning. And just the most basic activities of functioning involve this system. So, seeking, well, quite obviously, this is the system when active that motivates us to seek out new information, to begin to understand, first of all, our situation. So evaluating our situation, are we where we need to be? Is there somewhere we need to be going? Is there some goal we should be pursuing? And seeking out then information about our situation, just what's going on in our environment around us. So this motivates attending to incentive salience. So are there some stimuli in our environment that might be used to take care of some survival related needs that we have? Also, hedonic appraisal. So what that means is we're looking around to say, is there something in our environment that we might engage with to obtain some sort of reward or some sort of pleasure? And this seeking system also facilitates learning about our environment, updating our understanding of our environment that we're currently in, so that we can adapt to that, make progress towards goals that we have. So seeking system, curiosity, simply orientate ourselves in our environment. By the way, this one fueled to a great extent by the neurotransmitter dopamine. And so as that system is active, dopamine does produce this desire to explore our environment. And as we do this, and as we come closer and closer to goals, we get again a release of dopamine that urges us then to continue moving towards those goals. Now, the next three that we'll look at really are basic to our physical survival. Okay, so you have disgust. So sometimes we might refer to disgust as we find something repulsive, repulsion. It motivates avoidance of things that might be harmful to us, harmful foods, substances, and environments. Well, I tell you what, we're having that COVID pandemic right now. You talk about disgust, and yeah, you go out in public and there's somebody coughing all over things, and you think, oh, I gotta, yeah, you feel very disgusted. Yeah. So yeah, that's one that has some very important survival related things naturally built in, notice. Maybe not specifically people coughing on things, but disgust for rotting foods, dead bodies, things like that built in. You also have this rage system, and this one manifests as what? Anger, irritation, rage, any shades in between. And this has then the function of defending ourselves, protection of the organism or resources that one might need, as well as protection of conspecifics. Conspecifics are what? People that are part of your group, whether that be your family, whether that be your friends, people that are part of your political party, whatever. Conspecifics, protecting them. Also, notice limiting restraint on movement. Yeah, if we restrict people's movement, if we tie them up, yeah, they'll start getting angry and they'll try to break free, right? And that can even be where the restraint is maybe not physical, but psychological. We get angry when people try to take away our freedom, right? Okay. And then we have this fear system. And so this one, anywhere from what? Just mild, uh, nervousness, um, maybe sort of a little bit of worry, apprehension, to what sheer terror and anything in between. Notice this is also defensive because that fear system then motivates us what to get away from that thing that might be damaging to us, thereby limiting tissue damage. Once again, though, that fear system is not limited to being active only by things that might damage us physically, but things that we see to be also psychological threats. Um, so here we have a bunch of survival related systems. Then you have things that relate to our social needs. I'm going to suggest maybe reproduction is both social as well as physical, but you get the idea, you'll see. So the first one here, they have entitled it as the lust system. So this produces sexual desire when active. And so this is going to lead us then to what? Procreate, to find others to engage in sexual activity with. Notice also, though, there is a satiation function here, so that when those sexual desires have been satisfied, there is a feeling of satisfaction. Notice here that this system also contributes to bonding, to forming close relationships with that person that we engage the sexual activity with. And that's something that maybe we forget sometimes, and we think sexual activity is just a casual recreation. But in fact, we may also experience bonding that occurs as part of that process. So primarily ensures that we're going to reproduce and continue to have people. Um, the next few have to do with group cohesion. So groups being able to hold together and function together as a group. So these next three contribute to bonding as well as our normal development. So you have the panic attachment system. So this one leads to affiliation, to developing those close relationships and bonds between people that we have that are important to us. This ensures that the baby has a sense of attachment to its mother or whoever cares for it, so that it will do everything they can to stay together with them, to have their needs satisfied, because they can't do it themselves yet. Also, when separated from one whom we have an attachment to, this produces a sense of separation distress. So when we look at this, in many cases where we're seeing a person who experiences depression, there is a sense of separation distress. You see people get depressed after they break up with a loved one, or a loved one dies. Um, Maybe a parent, all their kids have now gone on and left the home, and there they are, get depressed. Or sometimes the separation is a psychological one rather than physical, and the person who now despairs of reaching goals that they had, there's a sense of separation distress, as if they've lost a loved one, and they look at that goal and say, it'll never happen for me, and get depressed. So it has a lot to do with depression on one end. So we see this also. Just happens. I think I mentioned my German Shepherd Rambo, who we found as a stray dog at the ranch, and turns out he's developed a very close attachment with us. But maybe because of some earlier experiences, he also experiences lots of separation distress. So when we go somewhere, he cries. He's really sad and upset when people are gone. Uh, and he really desires so much for us to be back with him. So what's this specific function? It protects vulnerable individuals like newborn babies and small children who need someone to help care for them. It keeps them close to those people. Um, Notice also creates bonding through a need for others. So this is very important within our family group, friendships, so forth. We also have this care system. So this one is going to motivate us to care for others. Now, particularly our offspring, we seem to be just biologically predisposed to care more about them than others, naturally speaking, anyway. But any caring for others may be motivated by this. If it's not motivated by a sense of duty, if we just feel like we want to care for them, there we have this system operating. So that's really important. Again, this motivates the mom, dad to take care of their child. Maybe we have um, an older sister or brother who steps in to care for their younger sibling, brother or sister, again, so forth. Sometimes, though, this may even motivate for caring for people we don't even know. And I'm thinking, boy, we're having that, COVID epidemic right now, and boy, we're sure really in need of activating that care system so that we all stay put and avoid spreading that virus around any more than it's going to do anyhow. Uh, just because we care about how others are doing, even those we don't know. Kind of important. And then we also have this, oh, by the way, care system. One of the big neurotransmitters here is oxytocin. This is one of these that, as it's released, is associated with activity of that care system and all the things that go with it. The play system. So this one motivates play. And so when this is active, we want to interact with other people in a positive way. And so we see this in young children who are highly motivated to engage in rough and tumble play. That's a play where you run around and you roll on the ground and you wrestle. And you see it too in kids where they engage in what we call social dramatic play, and they sort of make up their own little dramas and play them out, playing house or playing school or playing cops and robbers and all of that. So this is important because it results in bonding with conspecifics. Have you ever heard the statement, families that play together stay together? There's bonding when we play together. Um, Obviously, with children, same way. Also, developing basic adaptive social skills. So, adaptive skills in terms of developing the physical capabilities to deal with our environment, um, particularly our ancestors in the physical uh, interaction with our environment, but even today. Um, so, developing motor skills, for example, and also developing social skill. Maybe I hadn't thought of play as being important for that, but yeah, think about that. That's how kids learn, uh, you know, um, how to interact with other people appropriately. And in play, they learn that, okay, well, there's only so far you can go before you're going to get people mad at you and they won't want to play with you anymore. They learn that there's certain things that you should do if you want other people to play with you. Like if you can win all the time, if you want people to play with you, you need to let people win once in a while so that they'll still want to play. Social skills. Also, might mention this. You know, Again, going back to the canine world, I don't know why I keep going back to dogs because I know a little bit about them, I guess. One of the things they tell us about that is, you can't take the puppy away from its litter mates, the other puppies that are part of that litter, too early, or that dog won't develop the proper social skills to interact appropriately with other dogs. It may The dog may end up being aggressive towards other dogs or shy of them and so on if you take them away from the other puppies too soon. Well, guess what? We humans, it's a lot like that too. And they find that kids who are not allowed to play with other kids don't develop those social skills to interact with other people. And if they don't develop some of these skills by age 3, 4, 5, 6, they probably never will. So, yeah, play is a really important part of development. Also, play system is active in creativity. That's part of play, right? Coming up with new ways to play the game and so on. So whenever we're creative. Now, you think of adults. When's that play system active? Well, how about some things like this? Um, you want to get together with other people for a social gathering where there's no particular goal. You're just playing around. Or how about this? That you, yeah, play video games, or you come up with some other ways to compete with others in an organized sort of way. That can be this play system, although sometimes that can also become kind of work. Um, think about maybe the urge to go out and exercise and try different exercise, learn different exercise skills. That's one of the things I do. I got a bunch of stuff in my garage, different tools that I can sort of play around with to stay in shape. And when I go out there, sometimes it's work, but sometimes it's just play and trying different things with different tools. Um, Creativity, yeah. So when we're creating as adults. Okay, let's go on to this last one. And this is the one that is particularly involved with regulating conflict in groups and seeing to it that groups don't simply tear themselves apart. So this is the power and dominance system. So this then involves the ranking of individuals within that particular group, involves the status that each individual has. Are they, at the top of the dominance ladder, or are they somewhere below that or at the very bottom? So this also involves dominance versus submission. So notice why this is important, because having this system limits aggression in social groups. Okay, so if you have this system where people or animals, after interacting and maybe competing for dominance, it is now known that this one is more dominant than that one, and so forth. This one submits to that one. You don't have to fight every time some food shows up. You know that this one is going to eat and then that one, and so on. So rather than physically tearing each other apart every time food shows up, then we have an orderly progression of things. Maybe you say, well, what about the people at the bottom? Yes, they may get less, or maybe they don't get anything sometimes. But in terms of the survival of the group survives better under these circumstances than it does if they're constantly having no ranking and therefore constantly physically at each other's throats. Notice, though, it also enables resources to be allocated, especially sexual ones. Yeah, it's a reality. Okay. Okay. So as we look at these, here's a question for you. Yeah. Um, are these motivational systems? Are they emotional systems? And I think when you look at it, you have to say, well, they're kind of both. It's kind of hard to draw those distinctions that the textbook tries to do. Now, there are also other neural circuits that are associated with motivational drives, like there are neural circuits involved with urging us to get some sleep. On the other hand, urging us to come awake and be active. Another, which produces hunger, or if our needs for energy are satisfied, a sense of satiety that we've had enough and to stop eating. Same thing with thirst, another system there that promotes seeking liquids, and the other side of that system that tells us when we've ingested enough and we better quit. So these and the ones we just looked at, as we look at these, could each of these and the affects that we looked at previously in the previous screen maybe be better thought of as rather than motivations and emotions, but rather as sort of unidimensional subpersonalities. Now, I'll explain what I mean here. So, when you're in the grips of one of these systems being highly active, let's say that hunger system is on 100% right now. Or maybe, how about the lust system, sexual desire? When one of those systems is completely highly active, are you really the same person you are when all of these neural circuits are quiet? You're kind of not really the same person. And think about it. If you're extremely hungry and that system is highly activated, all you can think about is food. If you get hungry enough, you might even, want to fight people for food. That you wouldn't normally do that. The same thing, well, with that lust system, I won't go in. You can figure that one out, probably, how that differs. And notice it's kind of like a subpersonality that at that moment has dominated your desires and actions. And unidimensional because it's kind of just after one thing. So again, we might think of these as more than just a motivation or emotion. I think that's just too simple. Now, we can also then parse up emotions, motivations into positive and negative affect. Okay, so positive affect would include such things as happiness, joy, interest, hope, excitement, satisfaction. These tend to feel good, right? And then we have negative affect, which would involve things like anger, disgust, guilt, fear, sadness, anxiety, etc. Again, these they don't feel good. Okay. Notice again, though, that these also have a motivational component. So positive affect tends to draw us towards those things that are associated with it, those things that activate a sense of happiness, joy, interest, and so forth. Negative affect tends to what? Push us away from things generally, okay? Or try to change the situation so a particular situation is resolved and goes away. They tend to push things away. So these emotions have a motivational component. So this also interacts with cognitive maps. Now, cognitive maps, those are those mental maps we have of things. I talked about those. We talked about you kind of have a cognitive map of the campus, and you kind of know where the parking lot is and where you're at if you're in the classroom, and how that's related to where the library is, and so forth. And so having a cognitive map, you can kind of figure out how to get to some particular area that you want to go to. Now, we also have these cognitive maps in terms of our lives in general and in terms of our life goals. So that cognitive map pertaining to our life and our life goals tells us where we're at in our life as well as where we want to go and how those two things are related. Now, notice that when we're moving towards one of the goals, our cognitive map tells us, you're moving the right direction. And so the result is we generally are going to experience some positive affect as a result of those positive kinds of emotions. On the other hand, if we are unable to move towards one of these goals, then usually the result is negative affect. So we're trying to move towards completing that college course, but we can't get beyond a certain thing. And so we're angry or we're afraid we're not going to be able to get there. You get the idea. Um, so sometimes, though, we discover that our cognitive map is faulty. So, give you a case in point. Hmm. So maybe you've been dating someone for maybe a couple years, let's say, and you're thinking about maybe even moving in with them or getting married, maybe. Um, and then all of a sudden you find out that they've been unfaithful to you behind your back, not just once, the entire time. Yeah, all of a sudden you've discovered your cognitive map is way off. And yeah, it rips a big hole in that cognitive map. And what's the result? All kinds of those negative affect emotions. You know, there's anger. Maybe there's fear that, oh my gosh, what else am I missing that's going on and I haven't, and so on. Now, that should motivate us to then what? Update that cognitive map instead of denying that it's that way, that we actually then recognize the reality of the situation, reorient ourselves, and maybe set a new goal. Maybe set a goal of not that person, somebody else. So it's important to update those cognitive maps, and we should be motivated to do so. That also comes into play. Sometimes I have people, they'll say, they come to me and say, you know what, I'm having a problem with gaining too much weight. And I say, well, okay, what have you been eating? And they tell me, and it's a bunch of junk food, and they're kind of gobbling down things, no matter anything that comes along, whenever it comes along, and so forth. And in part, that can be a matter of not updating their cognitive map. They're sort of eating as if they were what? Uh, in a fifth grader or maybe still in high school. But when you get to be an adult, that's not effective. They haven't updated their cognitive map for eating so that they're eating like an adult. And to say, you know what? You're not in fifth grade anymore. You're not in high school. You can't eat that way anymore. Or, yeah, you're going to gain weight. And by the way, I've had to tell myself this. So don't think that I'm uh, looking down on anybody. I'm not. I know it's very easy to gain weight. It's very difficult to keep it off. But in fact, sometimes it's that cognitive map needs to be updated. Okay, so the orienting response, something that was discovered by actually Russian psychologists, they found that when we encounter a new experience that is not expected in that current environment, we get this orienting response. And so that new experience occurs. Our hippocampus compares that cognitive map of how we expect things to be in our environment with the experience we're just now having. It says there's a mismatch here. And again, this is going to produce um, a response. Now, the response usually initially is a fear response, and this orienting response often is behaviorally kind of freezing, and then beginning to take stock of your environment to gather more information about what is this really represent. Give you a case in point. You have a rat in a cage and everything's fine. It's very comfortable moving around in his environment or her environment there. And then you get some air that contains the scent of a cat and blow that air in there. And guess what? The rat's like, uh-oh, what happened? Orienting response. What does the rat do? Freezes up at first, and then as nothing else has happened, of course, as it freezes up, it's also getting ready to run away, by the way. So it's kind of preparing for a flight response or fight response, probably not fight though, in the case of cat scent. And then finally, the rat begins to gather more information, begins to look around to see, well, is there really a cat or is that just a cat scent? And then if nothing happens for a bit, it looks around, doesn't see a cat, it maybe begins to slowly move around its cage to check out, is there a cat over here? Is a cat over there? Is anything else out of place? So notice that this also interacts with our cognitive maps and our affect and brings us to approach and avoidance motivation. So we can look at these. Approach motivation is it stimulates us to move towards things that might produce some reward or satisfy some goal or even some physical need that we have. What emotions are primarily related to approach motivation? Well, you probably guessed it. It's going to be those positive affect emotions will give us that approach sort of motivation. Things are associated with those emotions stimulate us to approach those things. What about avoidance motivation? Well, let's have a look at this list. Avoidance. How about disgust? You bet. Okay. Fear? Yeah, you bet. Okay. All right. So look at those. And generally, negative affect emotions are also going to motivate avoidance as well. Avoidance of the situation that produces them or things associated. Now, here's a question. Can both approach and avoidance motivation occur at the same time? Well, if you've had an experience in life, you know that that is absolutely possible. Hmm. So, for example, maybe uh, you find yourself uh, physically, sexually attracted to someone, that lust system, right? And so you want to approach them to get to know them, but you're afraid. You're afraid they might reject you, call you stupid, who knows? And so you have now a motivational conflict. Yeah, you have both approach and avoidance motivation occurring at the same time. So how's that going to pan out? Here's another one. Sometimes this is we talk about a goal conflict. You have two goals that are in conflict with one another. So maybe let's say you want to uh, succeed and get an A in a course that you're taking, but you also want to have some fun as well. You want to spend some time interacting with other folks. And so you find yourself in a goal conflict. I've got that exam to study for, but there's a party going on that I could go to. What do I do? Yeah. So you've got, again, approach and avoidance motivation going on at the same time. You know, do I approach that situation or avoid it? Okay, so um, how do we overcome these situations? Because they tend to sort of paralyze us again. Um, One of the ways we can do this is through the use of habituation and confrontation. Okay, I think it's still recording, so I'm going to go on. Evidently, my internet went down for a few moments, so hopefully we're back on recording. And let's bring your screen up here. Sorry about that interruption. Okay. All right, so let's take this example. We have a person and they have this horrendous fear of being in enclosed places, claustrophobia. unfortunately, where they work, the 30th floor of this or that building, it's very inconvenient to take the stairs each day. So really, it would be beneficial if they could take the elevator. So how can we, as a clinical psychologist, help them overcome that difficulty? Well, one of the ways is we're going to use this habituation confrontation sort of approach. So we're going to work with that person and we're going to say, well, okay, we're going to approach this whole thing little by little. So, what's the least scary thing about riding on an elevator? Oh, they might say, well, it's coming in the door of the building. That's really where I start to feel a little bit anxious. So we're going to say, okay, well, let's do that. Let's go ahead and let's, first of all, just let's go to the building where you work. Let's go in that front door. And as soon as you start feeling a little bit anxious, let's stop and let's let you kind of get used to that feeling. And once you feel like you can go on, let's take a couple more steps. And so they do that. They habituate to it, take a couple more steps. They feel themselves getting a bit nervous and say, okay, well, let's stop here and let's sort of just, yeah, kind of get used to that feeling a little bit more. Okay. You okay? After a few minutes, yeah, I'm okay. You think you can go a little further? Yeah, I can take a few more steps. And so, okay, let's go as far as you can feel comfortable. Okay. Yeah. Or at least as far as you feel like you can stand it. And so they take a few more steps and eventually repeating this process of habituation confrontation. They now approach the elevator itself. And what's the next scariest thing? Oh, pressing the button just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Okay, well, let's just stand there until you feel like you could do it. Okay, yeah, you got lots of time. Yeah. So eventually they, you know, get up the courage to press the button. All right, you did a great job. And so then we might actually come back, end the session, come back later, come back again. And the next time we'll work through those steps, usually quicker the second time. Then, as they get to the point where they press the button, now the next step would be to actually get on the elevator, take a step in, and again, we continue that process until they are able to do it. Now, we're going to probably still have a lot of that approach avoidance motivation occurring. They may say, you know what, it still makes me nervous. It still creeps me out, but you know what? I know I'm going to be okay. I know that I can stand uh, the fear and so on if there's still some fear involved, and I'm gonna be able to do it. So, yeah, that sort of taking it step by step. Another way we can also deal with approach avoidance conflict is by activating another system. Okay, so let's go back to those systems. So let's say we have the fear system engaged. Oh, so you're out in the wild and you're approached by a bear. Obviously, you're not in Texas, unless you're by, or might be some in the, never mind. Anyway, you're somewhere there's bears, a bear approaching and so on. Would you be afraid to approach that bear? Of course you would. Yeah, you'd be crazy. You'd be able to just, walk up to that bear, right? Now, having said that, could you overcome that fear? Yes, you could very rapidly. If that bear was rushing to attack your child, you would readily overcome that. That care system would kick in, and even without maybe thinking about it, you would try to rush in to save your child. You've now overcome that. So that's an extreme example, but sometimes by activating a different system, we can overcome these approach avoidance conflicts. Or here's maybe another example of that. Maybe let's say that you want to get real strong. And so you got to lift some real heavy weights. And you get to a point where you look at that weight on the bar, maybe you're going to do a squats or something, and it's real heavy. You look at it and it's scary because it's real heavy. how do you overcome that? One of the ways you can do that is you can activate that rage system. You can think about something that would make you really, really angry and just get yourself into a rage and then approach that thing. All of a sudden, you can do it because you've activated another system to sort of override it. Okay. And that's the thing I didn't mention. This column here actually shows how each of these systems interacts with others. And some of these systems will what sort of down regulate other systems or will in turn activate other systems as well. So sometimes we could use that. Okay. So lots of stuff, a lot of it based on sort of how I have collected information and integrated it into my thinking, hopefully helpful to you. So let's now, I think let's do this. I think let's end this session and I'm going to record a separate video then on the classic perspectives on motivation that you'll find in your textbook. So let's stop this one right here. And if you have any questions, please contact me. We'll go